Hi kids. It's been a long time since we've been together. I wish we could be together at church, in our classroom. I know the classroom misses you all, as do I. But we will have to get together virtually, as we did at the end of the year last year, and for the foreseeable future. So this year, we're going to talk about courage and trust in God, and how the people of God put their trust in God and asked for courage, and how God granted them the courage to do things that were a little dangerous or a little scary. And we're going to have stories about people that were courageous. And the first one is about Queen Esther and her courage and how brave she was to do what she had to do for her people. So we're going to talk about Queen Esther and courage and trust in God today. And I have a really cute little craft that you can do at home, and I hope you like it. So let's get started with the story about Queen Esther. Now, Queen Esther was a Jew who lived in Persia. This is a map. This is Jerusalem. This is where the Jewish people did live. But a long, long time ago, they were captured by the people of Persia. And they were all sent to Persia, to this area. And that's where this Queen Esther lives. So we're going to talk about her. And I have some really cool pictures that I found. They're kind of like cartoons almost, but they're a little bit nicer. Okay? So, long ago in a country called Persia or Babylon, there was a king, and his name was Xerxes. And he wasn't a very nice guy. And he had a wife, and she wasn't a very nice lady. He asked her to go to a party with him, and she refused. And he was furious. Now the king had a right-hand man, and his name was Haman. And his right-hand man thought he was very important. And so he whispered in the king's ears and said, "You know, if other men's wives refused to come to the party with them, they may have their wife put to death. Now you're the king, and your wife refuses to go to the party. What are you going to do?" So the king put his wife to death. Not a very nice man. Now the king went for a long time without having a wife, but he wanted a wife. So he sent out his scouts throughout the country to find a beautiful young girl to be his bride. And it wasn't too long before the king's scouts happened upon the beautiful young Esther. Esther was beautiful and gracious and kind, just what the king was looking for. And in no time at all, Esther was married to the king. So here are some pictures. Here's a picture of the king, And this is a picture of Haman, the man who whispered in his ear about his first wife. And here's a picture of the decree that the king made to send out all the scouts to go look for a beautiful girl for his new wife. And here, the scout found the beautiful Esther living with her uncle Mordecai. And here we have a picture of the king crowning his new wife, Esther, as queen. Now, Esther was a Jew. The Jews were driven out of Israel, their home, about 70 years before, and they were exiled in Persia. Although they did their very best to make a living in this strange land, they prayed that someday they would be able to return to their home. Esther's uncle Mordecai was the leader of the Jews. Mordecai encouraged Esther to hide her faith from the king and his advisors, as she did. Haman had by this time become a powerful man in the kingdom, the prime minister of Persia, in fact. He decided that given his rise in power, which would be appropriate for everyone to bow down to him the way they would bow down to a king. But Mordecai refused to bow down to him. Haman was very, very angry and asked the king to authorize a royal decree to annihilate the Jews. Do you know what the word annihilate means? It means to get rid of them. Haman cast lots to determine the day this would happen, and so it was decreed that in Adar of the coming year, on the 13th day of the month, all the Jews would be killed in every province and every nation of the land. There would be no place to run and no place to hide. This is where our brave Queen Esther comes into the picture. Mordecai, having found out about Haman's evil intentions, sent Esther a message. So here is Haman and the king talking about annihilating the Jews. And here is Mordecai writing down a message to Queen Esther and having his man or servant or friend is going to deliver it to her. And here she has received it, and this is the person that delivered it to her. Mordecai told her what Haman was plotting and asked her to go to the king on behalf of the Jews. Esther was very afraid. She hadn't been allowed to see the king for a month. In fact, no one could see him without being invited. But she fasted and then she prayed for 3 days. She mustered up enough courage to go and see the king. Although he was initially very angry at her, King Xerxes spared her life and offered her half his kingdom for her wishes. All she asked was that the king and Haman join her for dinner that night. Well, as they were dining and drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "Now what is your request? Even up to half of my kingdom, it will be granted to you." Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this: if the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to a banquet that I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." Of course, both the king and Haman agreed to join her for the second banquet with his lovely young queen. Haman was especially pleased that he had been asked to dine with his king and the king's pretty bride 2 nights in a row, and was filled with pride. But then he saw Mordecai at the king's gate, and still Mordecai refused to bow to him. Haman was filled with rage. He decided that night that he would have a gallows built in which he would have Mordecai hung, and planned to speak to the king about it the very next morning. That way, he would have the whole matter dealt with during the day and be able to enjoy himself the next evening at the banquet in peace. That same night, the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of Chronicles. This is the record of his reign, to be brought in and to be read to him. The book was turned to the day that Mordecai exposed a plot to assassinate the king. The king was reminded of this tale and asked what reward Mordecai had received. The king's attendant told him that nothing had been done for Mordecai. The next morning, just as Haman was arriving to ask that Mordecai be hanged, the king asked him this question: "What should be done for a man the king delights to honor?" Haman, still filled with pride from the day before, mistakenly thought the king was referring to him. So he answered the king, "For a man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, and one of the royal crest placed on his head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes, and let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for a man the king delights to honor.'" Imagine Haman's shock when the king commanded, "Go at once, get a robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate." Haman obeyed the king, of course, but not happily. He was very upset that Mordecai, his enemy, was being honored by the king. Immediately after leading Mordecai around the city, proclaiming, "This is what is done for a man the king delights to honor," Haman had to go to the banquet with the king and the queen. Now finally, Esther shared the secret of her faith and proclaimed herself a Jew. She begged the king to spare her people. Harbona, one of the king's attendants, told the king of the gallows that Haman had built to have Mordecai hanged. The king was furious with Haman and ordered him to be hanged on the gallows. Haman, his pride and cruelty had led him to his own destruction, and the brave young Esther had saved her people. So Esther had prayed that she would have the courage to talk to the king, who was not a very nice man most of the time, and he saved her people. I hope you like that story about Queen Esther. It's one of my favorites. Now, this is your craft. Isn't that cute? So, this is the template, and what you do is you cut the 3 strips out. So there are 3 strips, 1, 2, 3, and you cut them out. So there's 1, 2, 3. Now, I found some metallic paper. That's what I made my little crown out of. This metallic paper, I found it at Staples. But you can use any gold-colored paper and decorate it with whatever you want. So what I did was I took these 3 strips and I placed them on the metallic paper, on the back side of the metallic paper, and I traced the strips, these 3 strips, I put them down on the paper. I traced them first, and then I cut them out of the gold paper, and then I glued them together. Actually, I didn't glue them, I stapled them. But you can glue them or staple them, and then I decorated it. And I think it's a lot of fun. I think you'll have fun with it. So I will attach the template to the to the email that I send to Father Mark. And I hope you have a lot of fun with the craft. And I'll see you again soon. Stay well, and God bless you all. Take care.